President Trump's key ally and key spokesman for the United States in the Ukraine war, in the war specifically on the Ukraine side, Kellogg, went to Kyiv yesterday and had a speech in front of a large audience where he made this bombshell drop about who's actually winning the war in Ukraine.
If he was winning, he'd be in Kyiv. If he was winning, he'd be west of the Dnipro River. If he was winning, he'd be on Odessa. If he was winning, he would have changed the government. Russia is, in fact, losing this war. Now, they may make movements and say, so, well, they're advancing in the Donbass region and the Donetsk. But if you consider advancing moving by meters, not miles, well, then, okay, that's successful. But at the cost they're having, it's enormous. And I don't think people truly appreciate it. It's a number. But the numbers they have lost, when you're talking dead and wounded, well over 1 million. They left Afghanistan after losing 18,000. We left Vietnam after losing 65,000. They've lost over 1 million dead or wounded. These numbers are World War II level numbers when you think about it. They're stunning in the loss. And this is and their first line units that they came and tried to take Kyiv with a little over four years ago. Those first line units are gone. So they've gone through a second or a third or fourth iteration of wartime commanders. Russia is in fact losing this war.
I asked Gary to replay that final phrase there, which was in the midst of the first soundbite, because I just could not believe that's what he actually said. And listen, you can't just dismiss what he says here, because he is President Trump's specifically chosen envoy for Ukraine. So it's not like he's just some talking head that goes on TV and says what he thinks. I mean, he is in close consultation with the President of the United States, with Steve Witkoff, with the Secretary of State, with the Secretary of War, all of that. And now then here he goes and makes these kinds of statements. And there's a number of reasons why I find this really troubling. In the specific things that he said. There was about a 25-minute presentation that he'd made. A lot of just kind of, wait, what did he say? Kind of moments in there. But let's just hit some of these big ones from that one soundbite, because there's a lot of meaning behind some of it that might give you a hint to what the United States is thinking and where this war may be going. First of all, he says, basically, if Russia's not already in Kyiv, then they've lost. If they're not already taking the Donbass, then they've lost. But you have to understand what Russia's objectives is. He again repeats this longtime canard that so many in the West want to use as the measure of success or failure, and that is the amount of territory that's been taken. And he says, if you're confident, content with gaining meters instead of miles, then cool, I guess that's fine. But it's in the end result, though, it has this huge number of Russian casualties. Now, here's the problem. One of the problems that compounding problem with what he said there. He's first of all trying to convince you that this publicly affirmed number is true, that Russia has lost 1.5 million people. World War II kind of stuff he's talking about. We left Vietnam, he says, after 68,000 troops that we lost in there. And that's how after about a decade or so we got out of there. Russia lost only 12,000 in Afghanistan in their 1980s fiasco. And then they left after a decade. And then now he's saying that after 3.5 years of war, they've lost, in his view, or his claim, 1.5 million people. And so the implication being, we just need to keep going, and then we'll keep killing, or that Russia will get tired of this. We got tired after 68,000. Russia previously got tired of the Soviet Union after only 12,000 in the Afghanistan deal. So the implication being, we just need to keep going militarily, and then they'll get tired. Okay, let's take that analogy at its face value. Let's look first of all at the Afghanistan situation. Now, since he doesn't know, and I bet not many people do know, is that there was a very methodical and planned withdrawal by the Russian side in Afghanistan. When Gorbachev came to power about halfway through, because they'd already been in there about 5 years by the time he came in, he gave them one more chance to say, all right, military, get this war won and over with. And I'll give you, I think it was like a year, maybe a year and a half, something like that. He says, y'all think y'all can get it done and win? I'm going to give you a shot. After the end of that year, they were no better than they were before. And he said, okay, that's it, we're going to leave. So then they started this very methodical and pretty slow exit and withdrawal from Afghanistan. And they spent 5 years withdrawing, and it was very coordinated. It was organized. It was under control. They did it very sequentially. They left a functioning government and a functioning military in place, and then they slowly reduced their footprint until they finally rolled out over that bridge in the northern part of the country and back into the Soviet Union. And that's exactly what they did. And the reason why Gorbachev made the decision is because he said the war is unwinnable. This is nothing but a drain on our country. This is stupid. Let's get out of here. That's what they did. Made perfect sense. They shouldn't have ever gone in the first place because, as we know very painfully from our own experience, there's nothing to win there, and all you can do is just be an abscess and a sore and a belly wound, whatever, that it just continues to fester until you finally stop it at your own withdrawal. Somehow he didn't mention our withdrawal from there, but we'll save that for another day. Then we go on to the Vietnam, where he did talk about our withdrawal. That is, we're on the other side of the world fighting in a war that we should never have started, and we're not going to win. The South Vietnamese government was incredibly corrupt. We actually supported a coup to overthrow that leader. Interesting there. I wonder if there's any analogies there for this. And at the end of the time, we made the deal. We got out, and eventually, because we didn't leave a good government in place, that sounds familiar again with Afghanistan, doesn't it? And then the North Vietnamese ended up winning that war too. But we got out because it was stupid. It was very divisive at home. People were like, why are we even going there? Nobody wanted to fight the war. We had to have a draft, and it was just grossly insufficient or unpopular. And there was no point in it. So we rightly made the decision to get out and cut that off. Now, he's trying to make the analogy that the same thing can happen with Russia, because now it's 1.5 million. And if we just keep going, they'll have the same thing, and they'll get tired of this, and then they'll want to withdraw too. This is where one of the things that actually concerns me that he may not realize, and that President Trump may not realize. And I don't know if his national security team realizes. This is an existential issue for Russia. This is not half a world away. This is not even on the other side of the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. This is on their front door. Their front door. And remember, Kaliningrad is already surrounded by NATO territory and has already been specifically threatened by the West, by the United States in particular. And they are not going to allow this to continue. That's why they went to war in the first place. And they are nothing if not more deeply convinced than ever. And this is not just at Putin level. This is all the way into society level. And if the fact that Putin is still somewhere around upper 70s, lower 80s in approval rating among his people, even now, tells you that they're not getting tired of this war. In fact, they still believe that it's an existential fight, the entire West against them, and that the West is using Ukraine as a sledgehammer to try and attack Russia. Everybody's funneling all their ammunition, weapon training, intelligence, etc., to use Ukraine as the battering ram against Russia. And we are. This is not propaganda. It's just self-evidently the truth. We brag about it. 50 nations, we're all helping Ukraine, etc. All of Europe is helping Ukraine to fight this battle against Russia. So Russia has, frankly, correctly identified that this is an all in the West against them. They cannot and dare not end this on because they get tired of fighting and leave a condition that allows the Ukrainian government as is to remain in power, that allows the West to continue to build up the Ukraine side and rebuild its army and put more weapons and have security guarantees and all that. They would be fools to the highest order if they did what Kellogg is implying that they want to do, which is just get tired of fighting and then leave an even stronger, bigger abscess on their border, virtually guaranteeing continued conflict and a perpetual state of conflict to their disadvantage. They're not going to do that. They would be crazy to do it. And if there's one thing you can say about Russia is they're not foolish. They're not stupid. And when they have the capacity and the power to impose their will over the Ukraine side, they're going to. The other thing he doesn't talk about there at all is this alleged 1.5 million Russian casualties. He didn't even look at the Ukraine casualties. Now, you don't have to be a math expert to be able to do addition and subtraction and to look at the population that's still left in Ukraine, which is substantially less than it was when the war started, and look at the remainder of the population in Russia and go, this gets into a war of attrition, and you probably do know the actual number of Ukraine's soldiers that have been killed. You have to say, who can sustain this over time? If this does drag out into another 10 years, like the Afghanistan and the Russian Afghanistan and the U.S. Vietnamese battles, or God forbid, if it should go into like a 20-year deal like the U.S. in our Afghanistan morass, who does that favor? Somehow he doesn't answer that question. And then he continues on there, and there was another comment that he made separately toward the end of this. Speaking of Vietnam, the presenter asked him a pretty point-blank tough question.
Do you ever wake up in a cold sweat, fearing that Ukraine could end up sharing the fate of South Vietnam? That is to say, we could negotiate a peace, and it could seem to be a breakthrough, but in the end, Ukraine doesn't survive as an independent state in the same way that South Vietnam did not. Is that the nightmare?
Yeah, no, I don't have that nightmare at all, because Ukraine will survive. And the reason for that is because you look at the resiliency of the people. Look, I'll give you an example, and I actually put it on my phone. And it gives you, and I tell people, this kind of gives you an attitude of what this looks like going into the future. And there was a recent, it was put on TikTok or something, that the attacks had gone on. They were people, Ukrainian citizens were in the subway, and sitting in the subway, and they weren't huddled down, eating or drinking. You know what they were doing? They were singing their national anthem. You cannot replicate that. You can't. And that's the fighting heart of a country. That's not going to happen to Ukraine.
That is, it's troubling. This is the example you want to give. No, I know that's not going to happen to Ukraine. You know why? Because I saw a cool video, and I saw a really heartwarming moment that someone captured on video of the people in Kyiv where they were singing their national anthem. Okay, that's heartwarming. That's cool. I mean, the video was probably not, I think I've even seen it, or at least some version of it. And it does show some defiance. But you know what it doesn't show is the slaughter of the hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian men. It doesn't talk about the ones that are being stolen off the street, the guys that are fighting these recruiter or mobilizers, the ones that are sometimes even attacking and killing them and running and fleeing from their lives, trying to go out of the country, or that the ones that when they get to the front, they abandon the fight in large numbers, somewhere between 600-700 per day, abandon the fight on top of whatever's wounded, on top of a shrinking manpower pool. That's what he doesn't even talk about. You talk about this heartwarming moment and you obliterate and blind everyone, to include apparently yourself, to the horrific cost of the Ukrainian people, because that counts too. And I assure you, there have been increasing numbers of actual protests in Ukraine. They haven't gone viral yet. They haven't continued. They haven't gotten too big yet. They're not being covered by the West, so you may not have seen any of that. But there have been some as recently as just 4 or 5 days ago. I haven't seen the news today. I don't know if they're continued on over the weekend, but toward the end of last week, they were definitely there, because people are tired of this. And when you look at the polls, the closer you get to the line of contact, the greater the percentage of Ukrainians who say, just get the war settled, because they don't want to have their people killed anymore. A lot of these people who were protesting are saying, don't just send our loved ones, our men, to certain death on the front line. That's the reason they're abandoning the fight. Those are the things that you need to be paying attention to, because the morale on the Russian side is sky high, and they have the industrial capacity to continue going down this path, etc. So that's what President Trump's envoy has been saying. Now let's look at what President Trump himself has said, and he focuses on something besides battlefield contingencies.
I want to stop the killing. So it just came out, or I think it came out, but I know for a fact, almost 8,000 young soldiers died this week between the two countries. A little bit more from Russia, but divided. You know, when you're the aggressor, you lose more. I don't know if you know that, but in war, when you're the aggressor, you tend to lose more. But it was a little bit more for Russia, but it was 8,000, a little bit more than 8,017, actually, died this week in that war. Why? And they're Russians. They're not American soldiers, but they're still human beings. their souls. And I want to stop it.
But then you'll believe that.
And I stopped 7 wars. I thought this was going to be an easy one for me, but this has turned out to be tough. The hatred between Zelensky and Putin is unfathomable.
Do you still believe that they will talk? That they will have a...
I don't know. I think I'm going to have to do all the talking. They hate each other.
When do you think that will take place?
I don't know. Relatively soon.
Has any of the NATO...
We're going to get it worked out one way or the other, but relatively soon.
Has any of the NATO...
They hate each other so much they can't breathe.
Yeah, they hate each other so much they can't breathe. The hatred is so palpable. I think it's probably accurate to say that is what Zelensky feels to Putin, but I don't think that much evidence exists to show that Putin has that antipathy towards Zelensky. I think it's contempt more than anything else, and he does not view him on an equal plane. Putin does not of his counterpart in Ukraine. And he is much more focused on what the Western European leaders do, what Trump is going to do, et cetera. Those are the things that he pays attention to. And I mean, you see Putin all the time. He does not look like an angry man. I think that the most angry I've seen him is a couple of times, certainly at the beginning of the war when he announced his special military operation, as they call the war. He was pretty angry on that day there. And there was one other time, and I can't recall which time it was, but it was like a one-off because something had happened. The rest of the time, he's very methodical and matter of fact, and just says, this is what we're doing. We still want negotiations. We're still willing to end it as long as our terms are accepted. But if we don't, we're going to continue on. Okay, next question. You remember that when we showed from Beijing? That's kind of where he's at. There's not a lot of hatred there. There only is on the Ukraine side. And the compounding the problem for our side is that Trump is still saying, yeah, we're going to get it done, though. We're going to get this done. Probably the trilateral meeting will have to include me because they won't even talk to each other. Putin continues to say routinely, I'm willing to talk to Zelensky. Now, signing a deal with him is a separate matter because he's not legally the president of the country because he's gone past his term. And at least according to Putin's definition or an analysis of the Ukrainian constitution, it does indeed say that they can suspend the elections during a wartime when there's martial law, but it doesn't say anything about extending this term of the president. In fact, the only thing it does have apparently is the speaker of the Ukrainian Rada, their parliament, apparently would have the authority and would have the power to sign something and legally bind his country to, but that's a separate issue. But he said he's willing to talk to him. So there is one side that won't talk, and that's the Ukraine side. And I understand why he wouldn't, because the only way he's going to talk to Putin is Putin's going to tell him there's no negotiation here. There's just my terms of surrender. And he's correct on that. Zelensky's not making that up. That is what would happen. Ergo, he's not going to talk to him. And then that kind of leads us to where is this going? So you see Trump still saying he's going to get it done. Well, maybe he had in mind the day before he put out a Truth Social, which was kind of a bombshell. We talked about that on Saturday. And in this thing, he's basically given an ultimatum, even not to Russia so much as to NATO, where he says, I am ready to do major sanctions on Russia when all NATO nations have agreed and started to do the same thing. And when all NATO nations stop buying oil from Russia, as you know, NATO's commitment to win has been far less than 100%. And the purchase of Russian oil by some has been shocking. And it goes on from there. But basically, he's saying that, we have these big sanctions. We're ready to go and do all that. But first, you've got to come across. So we'll sanction China, India, Brazil, anyone who's buying Russian oil, anyone who's doing business with Russia, we'll sanction them as long as NATO does first. And so that means NATO first has to stop buying Russian oil. And that's between somewhere around 15%, depending on how you want to calculate it, of petroleum products that they still buy from Russia. And that has to stop first. And then they have to be willing to harm their own economies and tariff China and India and Brazil, et cetera. And they're not going to do that. And I think Trump knows that. And I don't know where his mind is about where he thinks this is going. If he set up these conditions that are nearly impossible for Europe to adopt and to go down, then the question is going to be, where are you going to go? Because your envoy didn't say anything about stopping this about $1 billion a month in arms sales, which your NATO ambassador said about a couple of weeks ago, that we're going to continue to sell weapons to NATO for the use of funneling on into Ukraine at a rate of about $1 billion a month. I don't know where that's coming from. Our industrial capacity is not enough to create that much new stuff. So it's going to have to continue to dwindle our supplies. We just can't keep up with it. I don't know. Maybe that's his plan, just to keep on making money with it. because he's certainly not setting up any conditions that is going to bring the war to a resolution. Until you get both sides willing to say, we're willing to agree on these terms, the only thing left is the Russian side moving on with its military conquest. Let's see, just real quick there, I'm running out of a little bit of time here, but let me show you. Some in the United States, especially on Fox News, are not so convinced that sanctions are going to work and thinks maybe we need to go a different direction. Here is Dan Hoffman, who used to be, I think it was the CIA office, or he was in a Washington office in Moscow, station chief. So he does have some experience here of the Russians. Here's what he thinks.
You gave them ATACMS. The UK has long-range missiles. Germany has long-range missiles. We have them. Allow them to hit in Russia. And they hit the energy sector last night. It was the largest swarm of drones made by them in months. And it was effective. They're really affecting the energy inside Russia.
Yeah, I'm sorry to say that's the only way to deal with Russia's brutal onslaught. In fact, their press spokesman just yesterday said that there's going to be a pause in negotiations. That was according to Dmitry Peskov. And so we can talk all we want about sanctions, but that, going back to the days when President Biden said he thought that would deter Russia in the first place, I just don't think that's viable. But striking Russia inside Russian territory would be viable. And Germany needs to give Ukraine those long-range Taurus missiles so that Ukraine has the wherewithal to continue those strikes.
So, yeah, it's not going to be sanctions. Sanctions not going to work. I mean, he's right. He's right. Biden did try the sanctions. They had 18 rounds. They're working on the 19th round. Europe is right now. That's still not working. And then the question's got to be, then where are you going? Zelensky, I don't have time to play it right now, but Zelensky came out this weekend and he said, yeah, that's what we need, more sanctions. We need more arms, ammunition. Denmark has just in the last few days said that we're going to build a factory for long-range arms and fuel, rocket fuel for long-range weapons that Ukraine can then use to fire into Russia. Maria Zakharova, the spokesman for the foreign ministry in Russia, has warned that could escalate the war because they said this is the first time on NATO territory you are producing long-range components specifically for use to kill our people in our long-range cities. We're not just going to be passive at doing this, etc. And then Zelensky is continuing to use long-range fires into Russia. He says oil is the big thing there. That's what's really driving all this. And they want to harm Russia's oil infrastructure, their refining capacity, etc., to bring them to their knees and to bring them to the point to where they'll have a negotiated settlement on Ukraine's terms. Now, as I've told you, there's no such pain threshold on the Russian side that you can get to, whether militarily or economically. It's going to bring them to their knees against a smaller country that doesn't have the manpower, that doesn't have the industrial capacity that Russia has, and they can't fight a long-term attrition war without being ground to dust. I mean, again, it would be suicidal and foolish to the highest degree for Russia to do that, and illogical. Again, take the morality out of it. Take who you want to win. Those aren't even elements in this. The only thing that matters is what you can do and what you can't do. Our side cannot continue to go down the path that Hoffman is recommending, that Trump is trying to go down, that Kellogg is talking about, it, that Zelensky is actually doing. There's no path to success there, folks. There's not. All we're going to do is continue to make sure that the body count on the Ukraine side continues to stack up, that men continue to get stolen off the streets of Kyiv and other cities, maybe not so much in Kyiv because there's cameras there, but in other cities in the outlying areas where there aren't cameras, they're still getting stolen off the street every day. There's not enough of them. The Russians, according to the Ukraine's own commanding general, outnumbers them 3-1 across the board and up to 6-1 in some key areas of the battle. The battle on the front line does continue on. And by the way, Ukraine has had some success. It's striking Russia and some of their oil infrastructures. They have been advancing in their drone technology. They are very good in that. But there's two sides of that, too. Even Russia has just announced or has just released, and video has finally been shown out of the Garin 3, a jet-powered drone on the Russian side. This is a jet-powered drone right here. So this is their newest iteration, which has a bigger payload, and it can fly a lot faster and is much more difficult to shoot down. We'll see when those things start showing up in number. But even over this weekend, there was additional Russian shots. I think it was overnight, actually, into the Ukrainian military facilities and their oil facilities and refinement capacities, etc. So they're hitting the same thing. So it is a war, and both sides are being hit. But we can't just say that, yeah, Ukraine is hitting this stuff, so it's going to bring Russia to its knees, when Russia has far more capacity and is doing the same thing to the Ukraine side. You have to have the whole calculation. You have to have the whole equation involved. You can't just say, I'm going to take this element and that element and then base a policy off of it, oblivious to the fact that you're just taking Ukraine down the slower path to death. That's just where we are. That's why I say, folks, our policies are irrational, they're illogical, and they're immoral. Because not only will they not win, they're virtually guaranteeing the destruction of Ukraine, as opposed to if President Trump used his leverage on Zelensky, which, by the way, was the one party he didn't even mention in that letter over the weekend. He didn't put any pressure on Zelensky at all, only on NATO and only in threats on Russia with sanctions, nothing on Ukraine. So he's not even using his leverage that he does have to bring this war to a conclusion. So the only thing we can calculate is that he doesn't really want to end the war. I mean, that's just the truth of it. The evidence is there. Forget about the words. You have to look at when the words and the actions don't line up. You have to dismiss the words and look at the actions. And the actions say that President Trump and the West and Zelensky don't want the war to end. The Russians don't either. Well, the Russians do. They actually would like it to end, but they will keep fighting unless they get their terms the way that they have outlined them, because they see there is a path to a military victory on the Russian side. And it is a rational one. It is a painful one. It is a costly one. And it is something that's going to take up a lot of time. But they can see a rational path to a military victory from their side. Don't believe those people who say there is no military solution to this war. There is. There is a rational military solution from the Russian side against our side. And right now we are oblivious to that, and we are setting ourselves up for a lot of trouble, even in addition to the bloodshed and the crushing losses that we're inflicting on our erstwhile ally of Ukraine. And Zelensky, of course, is just as much to blame on that as anybody else, because he also has leverage here and he has agency, and he's not playing any of that either. He's just oblivious, and we're going to keep going to the demise of his own countrymen. That's where we are on this day. Appreciate you guys being with us today. Continue to please be sure and like and subscribe if you haven't done that. That helps us out a lot more than you may know. Look forward to seeing you later this afternoon at 2 o'clock on the Daniel Davis Deep Dive.